Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Music is My Mantra, where we explore all things music and wellness. Today is the very first Monday of May 2025, which means that it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm so excited to have all of our episodes this month dive a little bit deeper into understanding what mental health is, what are ways that we can work on our own mental health, and how we can continue on the journey, always moving towards that healthy, wealthy, and wise best version of ourselves. So today on the podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health. What is it? What are some key aspects of mental health? What are factors that influence our mental health? And the importance of taking care of it. I also am very excited to announce that I have a new EP out. It came out on Thursday, May 1st. I wanted this to come out during Mental Health Awareness Month because I do feel so passionately about this topic. If you've listened to all my episodes so far, you probably already know that I have a very personal relationship with alcoholism, and I have learned and grown a ton in this journey of trying to understand what that is and all the ways that it affected me in my childhood and adult life. So we're going to talk a little bit about mental health, and then I'll get into my new songs. So my EP is 3 songs that I have released in the past. However, 2 out of 3 of those songs I used a brand new distributor, and unfortunately, as things happen, this distributor went out of business. So I have not had my 2 out of 3 songs released into the world over the past year or 2. They haven't been available for streaming. My music videos still live on YouTube because I do have those videos on my channel. However, you could never find them on Instagram or that sort of thing. So I'm releasing this EP as a re-release of my 3 songs, which was supposed to actually be an EP to begin with. The first single is Save Yourself. The second single is Galaxies Collide. And the third is CSR, which is also Water Song. And CSR stands for Corporate Social Responsibility. So all of these 3 songs really tie into what we'll be talking about this month: mental health from the lens of the self, through our relationships, and through society. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to those songs, please go check them out. Save them in your libraries of songs. If you want to purchase them and download them, you can, even better. But please just give them a listen because they really were songs that I worked years on actually getting out and making music videos for them and that sort of thing. So you can listen to them on any streaming platform now, and you can also go watch the music videos for the songs on YouTube. So what is mental health? Mental health is a term to describe our social, physiological, and emotional well-being. And obviously on this podcast, I talk a lot about emotions because there are a lot of emotions involved in music, especially in songwriting. That's part of my process. If you watched one of my most recent episodes on songwriting and how songwriting can help to manage and understand your emotions, that's a cool episode. Go take a listen. But we also have our social well-being and our physiological well-being, which is the decisions that we make, the ability to think clearly, and maintain a positive outlook on life. Social well-being is obviously how we relate with each other, how we move throughout the world in relationship. It's also the ability to form and maintain healthy relationships, engage with your community, and feel connected to others. And I think this is so important because I've been talking a lot about healing on this podcast, and I think that's awesome and great. But mental health is so much more than just healing. Oftentimes, when we look at healing from a perspective of emotions and in the body, it can help to improve our mental health. But there's so many aspects of mental health that are important. So some of them that I already mentioned: building strong relationships. If you can build strong relationships and you're able to communicate, then you're probably a generally happy person. There's so many studies that show that relationships are the foundation of a happy life. Also, as I mentioned earlier, psychological well-being, making healthy choices. Mental health allows us to achieve our goals. It allows us to know ourselves so that we even know what our goals are. And once we're in a stable, healthy place, we can give back to society. You can imagine if you're not in a good state of mental health, what that might look like. I'm sure we've all experienced some sort of grieving or retreating or, going through these intense times of emotions where we're not really sure where we fit in with the bigger picture, either within our community or within our friend group, even sometimes within our family. And so there's a lot of different aspects of mental health. I wanted to talk about a few different factors today because if this is the first time that you're hearing about mental health, then I just want to give you a broad understanding of the language of it. However, it's become such a hot topic over the last decade that I'm sure this isn't the first time that you're hearing about it. After I give a few factors that influence mental health, I'll share a little bit about my story, and we'll call it a day. Some factors that influence mental health are genetics. I've talked on the podcast before about how your parents' and grandparents' stress and fears can actually be passed down to you and imprinted through genetics. There's environmental influences. This includes your life experience, your childhood upbringing, also societal stresses like COVID or maybe what economical class you fit into. There's a lot of stress around finances, right? These are all situational based on your environment. And then there's lifestyle elements that make up mental health. This would be like diet, exercise, substances that you may or may not be using, and sleep. Sleep is so big. These all can have a huge impact on your mental health. So again, there's a lot to unpack when we're talking about mental health, and everybody's journey through mental health is different. However, I do think it's important that we talk about it and we can have an open dialogue about it because somebody's story can help. And then we are all collectively healing together if we are all helping each other and sharing what we learned. So for me, mental health has been a lot about self-care and personal responsibility. And so what this means is really taking the time to understand what I need and not necessarily listening to what other people are putting on me. And I'll just share a quick story. When I was in college, I had a lot of pressure on myself. I was working to cover bills. I had a side hustle of making costumes and tailoring things for other college women. I was on the leadership board for my sorority and, of course, school. I was trying to graduate with honors and all that. And so I started drinking a ton of coffee and using Adderall as a way to help me get through tests and be able to stay up longer and not sleep and just really push myself to the limit. But my body had a huge reaction. It was not happy with little sleep. I was also drinking quite a bit because it was the campus lifestyle to go out and party on the weekends. And then I would take breaks and not be drinking, but I would still be not feeling well. I started getting headaches that were nonstop, and that was, obviously now I know that that's lack of sleep, too much caffeine, pushing through. But this was the very first time that I really had to look at myself. And I felt like I was always a smart student, but I just couldn't handle all the pressure. And so I saw multiple therapists, and I didn't really connect with them, the first few anyway. And so it just got really hard for me to understand what was happening. And no one said to me, you're drinking too much caffeine and you need sleep. Everyone continues to applaud the hustle culture. Wow, you're doing so many things. You're staying on top of it all, that sort of thing. I finally found therapists that used natural medicine and hypnosis, and he was the very first person who could actually help me to relax and start to unwind and unpack And I started eating better. I started drinking less coffee, and slowly the headache started to go away. And so for me, this was like the prime example of mental health, because our culture tells us that we need to be doing things one way, when in reality, each person has their own ability to tap into what your body needs, what your mind needs. And aside from that, it's possible to have a peaceful, happy life. It's possible because I am living it now. And there's still moments where I'm very busy, and there's still moments where I'm still in the matrix grinding, but I also have plenty of space in my life where I'm able to take care of my body. I take care of my health, and overall, I'm just much happier and satisfied, surrendering to God and this higher power that I can fully rely on, and have that dialogue and communication for myself. And so for everybody, this looks different, right? However, the whole point of this podcast is to help you to understand how you can improve your own mental health. So I've shared tools, how to sing and use music into getting into these practices. And I haven't talked so much about mindfulness, but just giving yourself space to even recognize where you are is incredibly humbling. If you're going all the time, or you're traveling all the time, or you're constantly working, or whatever it is, I find it really hard to believe that you can actually be grounded and feel and grow from a healthy place, because we all need grounding in order to make healthy, wise decisions and have a healthy mental state. So the second big moment of my understanding of mental wellness and mental illness was really around 2016 through 2018. And it came back around 2021 through 2023, these windows where I really had to take a look at myself and my relationship with my dad, and my relationship with, frankly, all men in my life, because my dad was an alcoholic and he suffered with alcoholism. And it took me a really long time to understand what alcoholism is, but it is classified as a disease. Now, I'll talk more about this in 2 episodes from now, because I'm going to go into my story with him and alcoholism. But for now, I just wanted to share that there's learning to move through all of that and changing your perspective on so many things that you thought that you knew, that you thought you understood, is really eye-opening. And so even like the mental health of your own being can fully change if you're just educating yourself about what is mental health, what is poor mental health, what are these different diseases that we categorize under mental health, and share more about my personal story with alcoholism in the next couple of episodes. But I'll just give you a little foretaste. My song Save Yourself, I wrote on December 31st, 2018. And at this point, I had been sans alcohol for 2 years. And I wrote this thinking about the city and how I felt kind of lonely. And it became a plea to my dad, because I had just been home for Christmas, I believe. And I started, at that point in my life, started going to Al-Anon meetings and learn more about the disease and putting up healthy boundaries and that sort of thing. So I wrote him a letter. I gave him an ultimatum about having a relationship with him when he was sober. And I wrote it in a really encouraging way. And I never spoke with him again. He passed in 2021. And there's so many layers to mental health in relation to our relationships, especially when there are primary relationships like our parents. That song didn't save him, but maybe it can be the inspiration for somebody else to check in on themselves and really try to understand their own mental health and their own state of being. The second song off of my new EP is called Galaxies Collide. It's about a toxic relationship, because when you're raised in a broken home, You have to heal those parts of you that were used to living and existing in broken relationships. And so Galaxies Collide is a love song, but it's also a very twisted love song because it's really more about codependency and narcissistic behavior than anything else. So if either of these things sound interesting to you, stay tuned for my later episodes later this month where I go all in on talking about alcoholism and also codependent relationships. And go listen to my new EP. The third song that I haven't mentioned yet is CSR, which is Corporate Social Responsibility. This song ties into mental health because this really speaks to the outside influences of how we're affected in our culture, this corporate America that we all live in or that we exist with. Check out the EP, go like the music videos on YouTube, save them on your streaming platforms, and stick around for all of my episodes this month as I dive deeper into these songs. I share my own experience about my own mental health through the lens of each of these pieces of music. Next week, we have a very special guest. Next week, I have the pleasure of having artist, songwriter, and yogi Courtney Cole on. She has her own podcast called The Love Frequency. So we'll be talking more about frequencies and also songwriting and wellness and healing and yoga. All of those things I love as parts of taking care of my own mental health. So I hope that it's just a really positive, inspirational episode for you. And then we'll dive deeper into all of the other songs and my personal experience with mental health. So today we just scratched the surface of what mental health is, but I hope that this inspired you to start thinking more about mental health and getting curious about maybe if there's somebody that you do know in your life, they've been diagnosed with a mental disease or a mental disorder, or maybe you've just recognizing that these different influences on mental health are things that you can look at on a deeper level so that you can start to heal these aspects of yourself and become more of who you are. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. It's going to be just a short one with that. I'll see you next time on Music is My Mantra with Courtney McKenna, next week with Courtney Cole. And until then, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise. Thank you. Bye.